Winston S. Churchill, The World Crisis, Volume 2, Chapter 6, The Action of the Dogger Bank. During the middle of January, uneasiness about our naval situation manifested itself in the high and secret circles of the government. Sir John Jellicoe has described in his book what he considered the exceptional weakness of the Grand Fleet at this juncture. His letters to the First Sea Lord were filled with disquieting computations of the relative strength of the British and German navies in the event of a great battle. Several of his dreadnoughts were undergoing their normal refits, and two more, the Monarch and the Conqueror, were temporarily disabled by a collision. He returned to the theory which he had developed in the preceding November, that the Germans had secretly armed their latest battleships with much heavier guns. But whereas in November the suggestion had been that 4 ships were now armed with 14-inch guns, it had by this time grown to 6 ships and 15-inch guns. There was of course no possibility of such a transformation having taken place. Our intelligence had secured us identifications of these vessels out of dock and in movement at various dates, which made it unbelievable that such enormous reconstructions could have been accomplished. I was, however, forced to combat these arguments and other equally alarming in character, and in particular to set up a committee under the Third Sea Lord to allay the apprehension that this great rearmament had taken place. Footnote. See Appendix H. End of footnote. Another request of the Commander-in-Chief caused me much embarrassment. He showed himself extremely anxious that the battle-cruisers which had been stationed at the Forth should be withdrawn to Cromarty in order to be in closer relation with the main fleet. This proposal, if acceded to, would have deprived us of the means of acting with any effect against a German raid upon our coasts, should the enemy repeat the experiment which he had tried on December 16 against Hartlepool and Scarborough. Cromarty was as far from Heligoland as Scapa, and the withdrawal of Admiral Beatty and the battle-cruisers to this remote station seemed to involve us in unnecessary helplessness. I would have preferred, indeed, that the whole battle fleet should come south to the Forth. But if this could not yet be achieved, I strongly objected to the battle-cruisers being withdrawn from strategic relation with the enemy's fast vessels. I therefore minuted to the First Sea Lord on January 20. The battle-cruisers ought to be kept together, as then we shall always have a force strong enough to beat the whole of the German fast vessels. They will be quite out of reach for any action to protect the coasts of England if they go to Cromarty, which is the same distance from Heligoland as Scapa. I therefore think they should not be divided or moved from the Forth, unless Admiral Beatty reports that he finds the navigational conditions dangerous. The outer line defences of the Forth are now nearly completed. There is a considerable force of trawlers, torpedo boats and submarines there under the direction of Admiral Lowry, who has shown himself to be a most energetic and capable officer. I see no reason why they should be mined in there more than at Cromarty, and in any case they ought never to proceed to sea without the channels being properly swept beforehand. There is good seaplane protection at the Forth, which can be reinforced if necessary. Winston S. Churchill. I discussed this question and other matters connected with the strength of the Grand Fleet with Lord Fisher fully the next morning, and he agreed to the view which I took. I therefore minuted to the Chief of the Staff on the afternoon of the 21st. The battle-cruisers should be kept together at the Forth at the present, unless Admiral Beatty reports that he finds the navigational conditions dangerous. Action accordingly. Winston S. Churchill. The repercussion of these misgivings manifested itself in the War Council, and on January 21 the Prime Minister wrote informing me that he was summoning a meeting of the War Council for the 28th and that he desired that Sir John Jellicoe should be invited to be present. I became conscious that adverse currents were once more flowing around the Admiralty. I did not think that it was right to bring Sir John Jellicoe away from his fleet to London in order to attend a war council during a period admittedly one of stringency in our own strength, and during which, from every indication, enemy activity might well be expected. I therefore decided to resist to the best of my ability the summoning of Sir John Jellicoe to London, and having obtained Lord Fisher's agreement, I wrote on January 22 the following letter. Mr. Churchill to Mr. Asquith, January 22, 1915. There is no similarity between the position and functions of a naval commander-in-chief and of a modern general in the field. Military operations take a long time to develop and to carry through. The situation changes by gradations. The directions from the commanding general are given by telegraph or telephone. The larger the army, the less direct is his contact with it, and the longer are the phases of every operation. With the fleet, on the other hand, it is nothing or everything. The Grand Fleet has always been kept at 4 hours' notice to proceed to sea. Sir John Jellicoe, in the letter which I read to you, expresses the opinion that he ought not to be more than 2 hours away from his flagship, even during the short period of rest we have pressed him to take. At any moment news may arrive which will require the whole fleet to proceed to sea immediately. The leadership of a fleet is personal in a sense and degree quite different from that of a large modern army. It all moves in one body in a strict drill formation, and the admiral gives with his own lips the actual executive words which regulate its attack upon the enemy. When Lord Fisher became First Sea Lord, the matters to be discussed were so serious that we took the extraordinary step of inviting Sir John Jellicoe to come south to consult with us. This was before the Germans had attempted any raid upon our coast, and after a long period of complete passivity on their part. Before he could return to his flagship, the enemy made their abortive attack on Yarmouth. The whole fleet was sent to sea without the flagship, and if the enemy had intended a decisive operation, either the opportunity of bringing him to action would have been missed, or the decisive battle of the war would have been fought without the commander-in-chief. In consequence of this experience, we arranged that if any further consultation was necessary, we should go up to him and not bring him down to us. There have already been 2 alarms in the last month. The 27th is the Emperor's birthday, and it is quite possible that something may be attempted then. In these circumstances I do not feel justified in telegraphing to Sir John Jellicoe, saying, "If you think you can get away, do so." He knows perfectly well that he ought not to leave, and we know well that we ought not to direct him to leave. Unless there is a graver military need for his presence here than there is for his presence with the fleet. I should be, of course, quite ready to arrange for you, or Mr. Balfour, or Lord Kitchener, to visit Sir John Jellicoe and discuss with him any and every aspect of the naval war. We believe that complete unity of thought on the main strategy exists between him and the Admiralty. The most intimate relations of personal friendship prevail between Sir John Jellicoe and the First Sea Lord. They write to each other every day, and sometimes several times a day. I know of no reason, either personal or of policy, which requires external intervention. But if such intervention were necessary, it would be much more in accordance with the public interest and safety that members of the War Council should visit Sir John Jellicoe then that he should be brought down here. The First Sea Lord desires me to say that these views have his full agreement. I must point out also that the Admiralty is not merely an administrative department, but is actually carrying on the war, and that orders are being issued constantly from this office to ships and squadrons in immediate contact with the enemy. At this present time, 3 separate operations, 2 of a very serious nature, are being prepared by us and are imminent. I hope, therefore, that we may continue to be sustained by your full confidence, which has helped us to achieve satisfactory results in the first 6 months of the war. I sent this letter over to Mr. Asquith on the same morning by my naval secretary, Commodore de Bartolome. This officer, who knew all the facts and was capable of explaining them with the utmost lucidity and tact, succeeded in reassuring the Prime Minister and returned an hour later to the Admiralty with this satisfactory news. We have seen the nature of the discussions which proceeded between the German naval staff and the Emperor at the beginning of the year, and the rigorous restrictions which had been imposed upon the German fleet. In consequence of these imperial discussions, Admiral von Ingenohl arranged to send his most powerful battle squadron, the third consisting of the Kaisers and the Königs, into the Baltic for training. He intended, however, that there should first be another enterprise of a limited character by the fleet in the North Sea. Owing to bad weather, this enterprise was postponed from day to day. Towards the middle of January, he and the German naval staff led themselves to believe that a great British naval offensive was imminent. They had heard about the dummy warships which were being constructed in Belfast, and they connected these with a plan for running block ships into the river mouths of the Heligoland Bight. They passed some days in a fever heat of excitement and at a high pitch of readiness. On the morning of the 19th, a German seaplane 60 miles out from Heligoland sighted numerous English ships bound upon an easterly course, among them several battle cruisers and close upon 100 small craft. This, then, they thought, was the great blocking operation. It was, in fact, a reconnaissance in force by the Harwich destroyer and submarine flotillas supported by the battle cruisers. When nothing happened, and later reports showed the Germans that the large part of the British fleet had approached their coast and had then retired, von Ingenohl concluded that the blocking operation had been abandoned or at any rate postponed. He proceeded forthwith, on the 20th, to relax his special precautions, and on the 21st sent the 3rd Squadron through the Kiel Canal for their exercises in the Baltic. The contradictory and inconsequent decisions which followed are sourly described in the German official history. Footnote in Chapter 6. End of footnote. After this general relaxation of the state of readiness, it would have been quite natural if, in accordance with the guiding lines laid down in the Commander-in-Chief's report and in his war diary, he had now shown still less initiative than before as regards offensive operations in the North Sea. But the weather improved just at this time, and Vice Admiral Eckermann, the Chief of Staff, wanted to take the opportunity of making up for inactivity during the bad weather. Accordingly, on January 22, he submitted the following suggestions to the Commander-in-Chief in writing. If the weather tomorrow remains as it has been this afternoon and evening, a cruiser and destroyer advance to the Doggerbank would, in my opinion, be very advisable. No special preparations are needed. An order issued tomorrow morning to the senior officer, scouting forces, would be sufficient. Proceed out at night, arrive in the forenoon, return in the evening. Admiral von Ingenohl, says the German historian, at once realized that this proposal was in contradiction to the guiding lines just laid down, And he made the following marginal note: I should prefer it if such advances were made only when the fleet can proceed in company. Unfortunately, this is impossible at the moment. Nevertheless, he gave his consent. At 10:25 the next morning the following order was sent to Rear Admiral von Hipper by wireless telegraphy. First and second scouting groups, senior officer of destroyers, and 2 flotillas to be selected by the senior officer scouting forces are to reconnoitre the Dogger Bank. They are to leave harbor this evening after dark and to return tomorrow evening after dark. On the 23rd, Lord Fisher, who, in spite of several divergencies of view which will be dealt with later, had been very staunch and good to me over the Jellicoe incident, was laid up with a cold. I therefore visited him at Archway House, which adjoins the Admiralty buildings. We had a long and pleasant talk over our various problems. It was nearly noon when I regained my room in the Admiralty. I had hardly sat down when the door opened quickly and in marched Sir Arthur Wilson unannounced. He looked at me intently, and there was a glow in his eye. Behind him came Oliver with charts and compasses. "First Lord, the fellows are coming out again." "When?" "Tonight. We have just got time to get Beatty there." We sent successively at brief intervals the following telegrams: Admiralty to Commodore T. in Harwich. Footnote: the officer commanding the flotillas, Commodore Tyward, was styled in naval parlance Commodore of Torpedoes, or for short, Commodore T. Similarly, the captain of submarines was called Captain S. End of footnote. Negative Plan Z. All your destroyers and light cruisers will be wanted tonight. Negative sending destroyers to Sheerness for escort. Admiralty to Vice Admiral Lyon, Rosyth. Get ready to sail at once with all battle cruisers and light cruisers and sea-going destroyers. Further orders follow. Admiralty to Commander-in-Chief Grand Fleet. 1st, 2nd, and 4th Battle Squadrons, cruisers and light cruisers, should be ready to sail after dark this evening. This done, Sir Arthur explained briefly the conclusions which he had formed from the intercepted German message which our cryptographers had translated, and from other intelligence of which he was a master. All the German fast vessels were putting to sea at dark, and a raid upon the British coast was clearly to be expected. My companions then addressed themselves to fixing the rendezvous for the various British forces. The chart and the compass circles showed in a moment that only Beatty from the 4th and Tyward from Harwich could intercept the Germans before they could strike and escape. The Grand Fleet could not reach the scene till the next afternoon, nor could any ships stationed at Cromarty. There was, however, just time for Beatty and Tyward to join forces at daylight near the Dogger Bank. Wilson and Oliver had already drawn on the chart, with what afterwards proved to be almost exact accuracy, the probable line of the enemy's course. They stepped it out with the compasses hour by hour, at what they guessed would be the German speed, till it reached our coasts. They then drew from the 4th and Harwich the intercepting lines of Beatty and of Tyrwhitt. The intention was that the British forces should meet and be united at daybreak at some point about 10 miles or half an hour behind the enemy after he had passed westward, and consequently be between him and his home. We discussed whether we could run the risk of a more adventurous scoop, that is, a rendezvous for our ships, still further to the eastward. This would give more certainty of being between the enemy and his home, but also more chance of missing him if the weather became thick. And remembering what had happened on December 16, this last possibility seemed a very serious one. Thus the rendezvous was fixed for 7 the next morning, the 24th, in 55 degrees 13 minutes north, 3 degrees 12 minutes east, that is 180 miles from Heligoland and almost in a line drawn from Heligoland to the Firth of Forth. The following telegram was sent to the Commander-in-Chief with the Grand Fleet at Scapa, to Admiral Bradford with the 3rd Battle Squadron, to Admiral Beatty with the battle cruisers at Rosyth, and to Commodore Tyrwhitt with the light cruisers and destroyers at Harwich. Footnote: this telegram has already been published in Mr. Filson Young's account of this action, with the battle cruisers, page 174. End of footnote. 4 German battle cruisers, 6 light cruisers and 22 destroyers will sail this evening to scout on Doggerbank, probably returning tomorrow evening. All available battle cruisers, light cruisers and destroyers from Rosyth should proceed to a rendezvous in 55 degrees 13 minutes north, 3 degrees 12 minutes east, arriving at 7 a.m. tomorrow. Commodore T is to proceed with all available destroyers and light cruisers from Harwich to join Vice Admiral Lyon at 7 a.m. at above rendezvous. If enemy is sighted by Commodore T while crossing their line of advance, they should be attacked. Wireless telegraphy is not to be used unless absolutely necessary. Telegram has been sent to Commander-in-Chief Home Fleet, Vice Admiral Lyon, Vice Admiral 3rd Battle Squadron, and Commodore T. Nearly an hour had passed in these calculations and discussions, and meanwhile the First Sea Lord was still unaware of what was taking place. I therefore asked Sir Arthur Wilson and the Chief of the Staff to take the charts and the draft telegram over to Archway House, and unless there was any difference of opinion, to dispatch it forthwith. Lord Fisher was quite content with the decisions which were proposed, and action was taken accordingly. The reader may imagine the tense feelings with which the long hours of the afternoon and evening were loaded. We shared our secret with none. That night I attended a dinner which the French ambassador was giving at Monsieur Milleron, then Minister of War, and in London on a mission of consequence. One felt separated from the distinguished company who gathered there by a film of isolated knowledge and overwhelming inward preoccupation. In December we had hardly credited our sources of information. All was uncertain. It had even seemed probable that nothing would occur. Now, with that experience wrought into one's being, only one thought could reign: battle at dawn. Battle for the first time in history between mighty super-dreadnought ships. And there was added a thrilling sense of a beast of prey moving stealthily forward, hour by hour, towards the trap. We were afoot the next morning while it was still dark, and Fisher, Wilson, Oliver and I were all in the war room when daylight began to grow out of doors. The ordinary night staff of the various departments were still at their posts. Suddenly, with the sureness of destiny and the punctuality of a parade, a telegram intercepted from the fleet was laid before us. It was from the 1st Light Cruiser Squadron to the Lion, Beatty, and the Iron Duke, Jellicoe. Sent 7:30 a.m., received 8:01 a.m. Urgent, enemy in sight, latitude 54 degrees 54 minutes north, longitude 3 degrees 30 minutes east, steering east, consisting of battle cruisers and cruisers, number unknown. And 2 minutes later, urgent, latitude 55 degrees 24 minutes north, longitude 4 degrees 15 minutes east, enemy in sight consisting of cruisers and destroyers, battle cruisers, light cruisers, steering between southeast and south. So once again it had all come true. There can be few purely mental experiences more charged with cold excitement than to follow almost from minute to minute the phases of a great naval action from silent rooms of the Admiralty. Out on blue water in the fighting ships amid the stunning detonations of the cannonade, Fractions of the event unfold themselves to the corporeal eye. There is the sense of action at its highest. There is the wrath of battle. There is the intense, self-effacing physical or mental toil. But in Whitehall only the clocks tick, and quiet men enter with quick steps, laying slips of penciled paper before other men, equally silent, who draw lines and scribble calculations, and point with the finger or make brief, subdued comments. Telegram succeeds telegram at a few minutes' interval as they are picked up and decoded, often in the wrong sequence, frequently of dubious import. And out of these a picture, always flickering and changing, rises in the mind, and imagination strikes out around it, at every stage flashes of hope or fear. First Light Cruiser Squadron to Commander-in-Chief, sent 8 a.m., received 8:20 a.m. Enemy's ships have altered course to northeast. Lion to Commander-in-Chief, sent 8:30 a.m., received 8:37 a.m. Enemy sighted consisting of 4 battlecruisers, 4 light cruisers, destroyers, number unknown, bearing south 61, east 11 miles. My position, latitude 54 degrees 50 minutes north, longitude 3 degrees 37 minutes east, course south 40 east, 26 knots. Commander-in-Chief to 3rd Battle Squadron, sent 9 a.m., received 9:18 a.m. Steer towards Heligoland. Commodore Tyward to Commander-in-Chief, sent 9:05 a.m., received 9:27 a.m. 1st Flotilla and 3rd Flotilla are astern of battlecruisers, 2 miles. Commander-in-Chief to 3rd Battle Squadron, sent 9:20 a.m., received 9:28 a.m. Act to support 1st Battlecruiser Squadron. Lion to Commander-in-Chief, sent 9:30 a.m., received 9:48 a.m. Am engaging enemy battlecruisers, range 16,000 yards. 1st Light Cruiser Squadron to Lion, sent 10:08 a.m., received 10:18 a.m. Enemy detached 1 rearmost battlecruiser, am driven off. 1st Light Cruiser Squadron to Lion, sent 10:21 a.m., received 10:27 a.m. Am keeping touch with enemy. 1st Light Cruiser Squadron to Commander-in-Chief and Lion, sent 10:15 a.m., received 10:59 a.m. Enemy's airships east-southeast. We had not heard the Lion speak for nearly an hour and a half, during the whole of which period, presumably, she and the 1st Battlecruiser Squadron were in full battle. Evidently Sir John Jellicoe also felt the weight of this oppressive silence. Commander-in-Chief to Lion, sent 11:01 a.m., received by Admiralty 11:09 a.m. Are you in action? Another 20 minutes silence, seeming much longer, ensued. Then, at last, at 11:37, came, in the following message, not from the Lion or the 1st Battlecruiser Squadron, but from the senior officer commanding the 2nd Battlecruiser Squadron to the Commander-in-Chief. Heavy engagement with enemy battlecruisers, latitude 54 degrees 19 minutes north, longitude 5 degrees 5 minutes east. Someone said, Moore is reporting. Evidently the Lion is knocked out. Across my mind there rose a purely irrelevant picture. I thought of the memorial services I had so often attended in Westminster Abbey, the crowd and uniforms, the coffin with the Union Jack, the searching music, Beatty. That vision at least was not true, but, alas, too true indeed. The Lion knocked out. It is time to escape from the tense atmosphere of the war room and watch the squadrons on blue water. When the first light of the clear winter's morning shone on a calm sea, Admiral Beatty with his 5 battlecruisers, Lion, Tiger, Princess Royal, New Zealand and Indomitable, and 4 light cruisers reached the rendezvous. 10 minutes later he sighted Commodore Tyrwhitt in the Arethusa with 7 of his fastest M-class destroyers, constituting the van of the Harwich force, and almost simultaneously there came the flash of the first gun. The Aurora, following the Commodore as fast as possible at a few miles' distance, with the Undaunted and 28 more destroyers of the 1st and 3rd flotillas, came into contact with Admiral von Hipper, who, with the Seydlitz, Moltke, Derfflinger, and Blücher, accompanied by 4 light cruisers and 22 German destroyers, was steaming along the very course and almost at the very moment which Wilson and Oliver had forecast. The Aurora opened fire upon a German light cruiser, and signalled immediately that she was engaged with the high sea fleet. Thus all 3 lines of advance met almost at a single point. We have seen the causes that led to Admiral von Hipper's excursion. As day broke, his ships were spread in line abreast on a considerable front, searching no doubt for British fishing vessels and light patrol forces. What followed is extremely simple. The moment the German commander discovered himself in the presence of numerous British warships, including the battle cruisers, his decision was taken. He collected his ships, turned completely round, and ran for home with the utmost possible dispatch. Meanwhile, Admiral Beatty, working up his speed with equal zeal, had already passed somewhat to the southward of the Germans, and by 8 o'clock was steaming on a parallel course about 14 miles behind them. A tremendous race of all the fastest vessels in the 2 navies now began. Because of the danger of the retreating enemy dropping mines behind him, all the British vessels avoided his actual wake. Commodore Goodenough and his 4 light cruisers keeping slightly to the north. Tyrwhitt, with his whole force of destroyers and cruisers, keeping slightly to the south, and the British battle cruisers further southward still. In pursuit on land, the battlefield is stationary, and the troops move. In the stern chase at sea, the ships alter their relative positions very gradually, while the battlefield rushes past as fast as a horse can gallop. In this posture, therefore, all parties to the event continued for a spell. Meanwhile, the speed of the British battlecruisers developed continually, and it soon became evident that they were gaining on the Germans. By 8:30, 26 knots was realized, or 1 knot more than the designed speeds of the Indomitable and the New Zealand. Admiral Beatty signalled, "Well done, Indomitable," and demanded 27, 28, and 29 knots in succession at brief intervals. These immense speeds could only be approached by his 3 leading ships, the Lion in the van, the Tiger, and the Princess Royal. It was his intention to overtake the enemy and bring him to battle in the first instance with his 3 ships against 4. The distance between the rearmost Germans and the leading British ships was now diminishing steadily. So great was the speed of the super-dreadnoughts that the destroyers could barely hold their own with them. As the event had fallen, at the moment of contact Tyrwhitt and his 40 vessels were pursuing a course which led between the hostile battlecruiser squadrons. This was inconvenient, because by advancing and drawing abreast of the battlecruisers, as did the fast M-boats, they would obstruct their view with enormous clouds of smoke. On the other hand, at the pace at which all were going, it was not possible to shift them to the southern flank, where they could have pressed ahead at a minimum of 27 knots. To fall back behind the British battlecruisers and to turn off obliquely would have thrown them out of the hunt for good and all. They were therefore not able to overtake and head off the enemy, and remained somewhat shut in, slightly astern of and inside the British battlecruiser line. About 9 o'clock the Lion opened fire. Footnote: I have followed in the main the account given by the official historian, modified by the narrative of Commander Filson Young, an eyewitness in the foretop of the Lion, and corrected and supplemented by other first-hand information. End of footnote. Up to 1914, the greatest range for battle practice had been 10,000 yards. In the spring of that year, I had ordered an experimental firing at 14,000 yards, when, to universal astonishment, considerable accuracy was immediately attained. But this lesson had not been digested when the war broke out. Now, in the first action between super-dreadnought ships, the pursuers spontaneously opened fire at the hitherto unprecedented range of 20,000 yards. The second shot passed over the Blücher, and the Lion now began a deliberate fire upon this ship. As the range gradually shortened, the Tiger and the Princess Royal joined in, and hits upon the Blücher were almost immediately observed. At 9:15, the Germans replied. The Lion now reached out after the Derfflinger, while the Tiger and the Princess Royal continued firing upon the Blücher. The fire became effective on both these two German ships. The third salvo hit the Blücher on the waterline, reducing her speed. The fourth wrought tremendous damage, disabling two after-turrets and between 200 and 300 men. At 9:35, the New Zealand having come into range of the Blücher, Admiral Beatty signalled his ships to engage their opposite numbers, ship for ship, he himself firing at the German flagship Seydlitz, which was leading the retreat. The first shell of the Lion that hit the Seydlitz at over 17,000 yards range inflicted fearful damage, shattering her stern and wrecking both her rear turrets. The entire gun crews of both turrets, wrote Admiral Scheer, perished very quickly. The flames rose above the turrets as high as a house. Meanwhile, however, the enemy had also begun to hit. Owing to a misunderstanding of her orders, the Tiger, as well as the Lion, was firing upon the Seydlitz and missing her badly. The Princess Royal was rightly engaging the Derfflinger, the New Zealand the Blücher, and the Indomitable was not within range. Thus, the Moltke was free from all attack and able to fire undisturbed on the Lion. Footnote: the official naval history has by mistake interchanged the Moltke and the Derfflinger. According to the German accounts, it is clear that the Moltke was the ship running free and that she alone had no antagonist and no casualties. End of footnote. All the three leading German ships concentrated their fire upon the Lion, and for the next hour and a half this noble vessel, hurled forward at her utmost speed, carried the dauntless flag of the Admiral into the teeth of the storm. The sea rose in mighty fountains all around her, which fell in hundreds of tons upon her deck. The splinters from shells bursting close alongside filled the air with fragments. From 9:30 onwards she was repeatedly struck. A little before 10, her foremost turret was smashed in and one of its guns disabled. A few minutes later her armor was pierced by an 11-inch shell. At 10:18, two 12-inch shells from the Derfflinger struck her, one piercing the armor, bursting behind it and flooding several compartments, the other driving in an armored plate below the waterline. The Admiral, disdaining the conning tower and standing with his staff upon the open bridge, continued to drive his flagship forward at her extreme speed, which was not yet impaired, zigzagging from time to time to spoil the accuracy of the enemy's fire. The situation was favorable. None of our battle cruisers had been seriously damaged, and the Indomitable was available to deal with any wounded enemy ships. The critical period of the action was now approaching. At 10:22, Admiral Beatty, finding his ships greatly hampered by smoke interference, ordered the battlecruisers to form a line of bearing north-northwest, and to proceed at their utmost speed. His intention was to avoid the smoke and splashes and bring the rear of his squadron into closer action with the enemy, who had formed on a line of bearing to port of Seydlitz. The German flotillas, by altering their course to starboard, threatened to draw him across their wake, that is, into water where their mines and torpedoes might be encountered. This Parthian menace forced Admiral Beatty to desist from his closing movement, and to resume his parallel course under a tremendous fire. The Blücher was now burning and falling out of the German line, and at 10:45 Admiral Beatty ordered his rearmost ship, the Indomitable, which was some distance astern, but rapidly overhauling the Blücher, to attack the enemy breaking away to the northward, meaning thereby the Blücher. He made further efforts to close, but at 10:52, while in the hottest action with the Seydlitz, the Moltke and the Derfflinger, the Lion, which had already received 14 hits, was suddenly struck in a spot vital to her speed and fatal, as it proved, to our complete victory. Her port engine failed, she listed 10 degrees, and her speed sank in a few minutes to 15 knots. At this moment, at 10:54, when the Lion was falling out of the line, and the Tiger, the Princess Royal, and the New Zealand were drawing swiftly past her, the wash of a periscope on the starboard bow was reported from the Lion's foretop to Admiral Beatty, and seen by both the Admiral and his staff. German submarines were, as we now know, actually in this area at the time. To avoid this new danger by a quick maneuver, he ordered the whole squadron to turn 8 points to port together, that is, across the rear of the enemy and at right angles to his own previous course. This movement was intended to be of the briefest duration, and 4 minutes later the Admiral modified it by the signal course northeast. Matters now, however, passed completely beyond his control. The Lion was falling far astern of her consorts. Her wireless had been shot away. Her searchlights were smashed, and only 2 signal halyards were left. Thus, at this crisis, when the great vessels, friend and foe, were shearing through the water at nearly 30 miles an hour, and, once deflected, were altering their relationship in space every second, the Lion, carrying in Admiral Beatty the whole spirit and direction of the battle, was crippled and almost dumb. Her last 2 signals were, attack the rear of the enemy, and then as a parting injunction, keep closer to the enemy. Repeat the signal the Admiral is now making. But the signal flags, blowing end on, were difficult to read, and none of the battlecruisers took in the final order. It was at this juncture and in these circumstances that Rear Admiral Moore, whose flag was flying in the New Zealand, now third in the line, succeeded to the command. He was an officer whose distinguished abilities had made him invaluable as Third Sea Lord during the greater part of my tenure at the Admiralty. He had earnestly desired a sea command adequate to his rank and services. His wish had been accorded, and now almost at once fortune presented herself to him in mocking and dubious guise. He was not certain at first that he had succeeded to the command. It was never formally transferred. He did not know why Admiral Beatty had suddenly turned so sharply to the north. No hostile submarines had been reported to him. The signal, attack the rear of the enemy, was hoisted by the Lion before the compass signal, course northeast, had been hauled down. Both signals were therefore read by all the battlecruisers as one, and this was interpreted by Rear Admiral Moore as a direct order to attack the forlorn and isolated Blücher, which actually bore northeast from him at that moment. Neither Admiral Moore nor any of the battlecruisers ever received the signal, keep closer to the enemy. He therefore suffered the Tiger, his leading ship, to continue on her course under the same misconstruction of Admiral Beatty's orders which she had independently sustained. He gave no order of any kind until 11:52, nearly an hour after the Lion had fallen out of the line. The whole operation therefore went to pieces. All 4 of the British battlecruisers ceased firing on the retreating Germans and began to circle round the wretched Blücher, which, already a terrible wreck, was being engaged by the light cruisers and the M-destroyers. At 12:10, the Blücher, fighting with desperate courage to the last, rolled over and sank beneath the waves. Of her crew of nearly 1,200 men, 250 were picked up by the British destroyers and light cruisers, and more would have been saved but for the intervention of a German seaplane which dropped its bombs indiscriminately on the drowning Germans and the British rescuers. Meanwhile, Admiral von Hipper, delivered by a single fateful shot from almost certain destruction, continued to make off at his best speed towards Heligoland, then 80 miles away, 2 out of his 3 remaining ships burning fiercely, cumbered with wreckage and crowded with dead and wounded. Thus, for the second time, when already in the jaws of destruction, the German battlecruiser squadron escaped. In the opinion of his professional superiors at the Admiralty, Rear Admiral Moore had warrant for what he did or did not do. He had not departed from a strict interpretation of the actual orders taken in by his ships. These orders, uncorrected by the receipts of the final signal, "Keep closer to the enemy," seemed to suggest that some reason unknown to Rear Admiral Moore had led the most daring of our naval leaders to break off the action. It is not easy to fix the precise moment, while the Lion was dropping astern, when the command actually passed to him. The greater his confidence in Admiral Beatty, the slower he would be to assume control, and the more impressive the signal to change the course across the enemy's rear would appear. A quarter of an hour might well have been accounted for in this way, and a quarter of an hour was a long time. Ships just holding their own in pursuit or in station on other ships, with only a small margin of speed to spare, lose distance very quickly once the parallel course is departed from. It was certainly open to him, once he was sure that he was in command and that Admiral Beatty was out of it, to resume the parallel course and reopen the action with von Hipper's disappearing vessels. But a long delay must have ensued before he could have come within range, and his squadron would all the time have been drawing nearer to Heligoland and the German high seas fleet. The tests to which the admirals in high command are subjected during a naval engagement are far more searching than those of generals in a battle on land. The admiral actually leads the fleet in person and is probably under as severe fire and in as great danger as any man in it. A general, whatever his wishes, has no choice but to remain in his headquarters in complete tranquillity, 10, 15, or even 20 miles away. The general is forced to rely on the reports of others which flow upwards to him from brigades, divisions, and corps, and transmits his orders through the same channel after consultation with his staff. The admiral sees with his own eyes and with his own lips pronounces the orders which move the whole mighty event. The phases of a naval action succeed one another at intervals of 2 or 3 minutes, whereas in modern battles 2 or 3 hours, and sometimes even days, elapse before fresh decisions are required from an army commander. Once the sea battle is joined, the whole event is in the hand of the admiral or his successor as long as he can signal, whereas on land, after 0 hour has struck, it escapes for the time being almost entirely from the control of the general. There are 100 ways of explaining a defeat on land and of obscuring the consequences of any mistake. Of these, the simplest is to continue the attack next day in a different direction or under different conditions. But on the sea, no chance returns. The enemy disappears for months, and the battle is over. The admiral's orders, uttered from minute to minute, are recorded forever in the logbook of every vessel engaged. The great ships, unless their mechanism ceases to function, obey punctually and inexorably the directions they receive from the human will. The course and speed of every vessel at every moment are recorded. The value of every vessel sunk is known. Their names are published. The charts and compasses are produced, and with almost exact accuracy the position and the movement of every ship can be fixed in relation to every other. The battlefield is flat and almost unvarying. Exact explanations can be required at every point, and the whole intense scene can be reconstructed and analyzed in the glare of history. This should always be borne in mind in forming judgments. While these grave matters had so decided themselves, Admiral Beatty, far astern and believing the chase was being continued, had resolved to quit the wounded Lion and, hoisting his flag upon the destroyer attack, hasten forward to overtake the battle. Instead, somewhat after noon, he met his ships coming back towards him. In the first bitterness at learning that the rest of the enemy had escaped, he ordered the chase to be resumed, although there was now no chance of its succeeding. 20 or 30 precious minutes had been lost, and with them 20 or 30,000 yards. This was irretrievable, and realizing that further pursuit was useless, he turned back and steered towards the Lion to make provision for her safety and return to the Forth. The condition of the Lion seemed for some time critical. Her speed fell to 8 knots, her list increased, and serious anxiety arose. Her engines finally became incapable of steaming at all. She was taken in tow by the Indomitable, and in this fashion began her long, slow, and dangerous return to the Forth. 60 destroyers under Commodore Tyrwhitt surrounded her in ceaseless evolutions, protecting her from torpedo or submarine attack all through the night of the 24th and through the 25th. If submarines are seen, ordered the Commodore, shoot and ram them without regard to your neighbors. At daylight on the 26th, the Lion, amid cheering crowds, was brought safely to anchor at Rosyth. After the action had been finally broken off, I sent a messenger by motor car with the following letter to the Prime Minister, who was at Walmer. Mr. Churchill to Mr. Asquith. January 24, 1915, 3:45 p.m. This morning, Beatty, with 5 battle cruisers and a superior force of light cruisers and destroyers, met Derfflinger, Seydlitz, Moltke, and Blücher, with light cruisers and destroyers in the middle of the North Sea. The Germans ran for home immediately, and a fierce pursuit ensued, producing a severe action between the battle cruisers on both sides. The Lion is damaged, but is returning home at 12 knots. Beatty has shifted his flag to the Princess Royal. The Blücher, 15,500 tons and 25½ knots, practically a battle cruiser, though with 12 8.2-inch guns and 880 men, is sunk. Footnote: she actually had nearly 1,200 men on board. End of footnote. 2 other German battlecruisers reported seriously injured. Deserting the Blücher, the Germans managed to make good their escape into their own torpedo area, where we thought better not to follow. I have no details so far of the destroyer and light cruiser fighting, but Meteor, one of our destroyers, is reported damaged, and I am hopeful that some business has been done. Our ships are now returning. This action gives us a good line of forejudging the results of a general battle. It may be roughly said that we should probably fight 6-4 at the worst, whereas today was 5-4. Blücher is a heavy loss to the German cruiser fleet. She was only 5 years old. I am very grateful to you for not pressing me about Jellicoe." Late that night came his answer back. Mr. Asquith to Mr. Churchill. "Sunday. I think this news very good and congratulate you heartily. The result of the engagement confirmed and fortified my own convictions of the great strength of the British line of battle, and in particular of the ships armed with the 13.5-inch guns. But while the strength of the fleet was proved to be satisfactory, its strategic station was also proved to be too remote. But for the fact that the battle-cruisers had been held at the Forth against the wishes of the commander-in-chief, the Germans would have raided the British coasts with impunity. Nothing but Tyrwhitt and his light cruisers and flotillas could have caught them, and these would have been easily repulsed and seriously handled in a daylight action by the forces which the Germans sent to sea. At the moment of contact with the enemy, the Grand Fleet was nearly 150 miles to the northward. It was completely out of relation and could not, unless the fight moved towards it, have come into action that day. The only support which was available for Admiral Beatty was the 3rd Battle Squadron. Had the German High Sea Fleet been at sea to sustain its fast forces, we should have been powerless to strike, if not indeed in serious danger of being struck. I therefore, as soon as we could appreciate the results of the battle, addressed the following letter to the Commander-in-Chief. Mr. Churchill to Sir John Jellicoe, January 26, 1915. I wish you to consider moving your base from Scapa Flow to the Firth of Forth. The Firth of Forth is specified in your war orders as your principal fueling base. It is a strongly defended port. It has many facilities which are lacking at Scapa. The inner line of anti-submarine defenses has been completed and is thoroughly satisfactory. The outer line is almost completed, and the Oxcars, Inchmickery and Inchcolm islets are defended with guns and lights. There is therefore ample room for your whole fleet. In order to get full security, we require a greater concentration of our resources. If you came south and joined all your trawlers and defensive flotillas to those already at the Forth, it would be possible to keep an area at least 40 miles from May Island absolutely swept and secured. Admiral Lowry has shown himself to be a thoroughly competent officer, and with the large numbers of protective and scouting vessels which would then be available, as well as a large supply of seaplanes, your exits and entrances could be made safer than at Scapa. Scapa should, of course, be kept up on a reduced scale, occupied by the 10th Battle Squadron, and watched by a few destroyers and trawlers from Cromarty. Footnote: the 10th Battle Squadron are the dummy battleships. End of footnote. Cromarty would remain as at present. We would endeavour to bring the Medway floating dock to Rosyth, and gather a regular repair staff there. This would help you in refits. You would then have under your hand 3 flotillas of the First Fleet, comprising 63 sea-going destroyers, your present 29, and Oak, less 8. Admiral Lowry's 7 destroyers and 12 ex-coastals, a total of 103 destroyers. You would have your own 84 trawlers and minesweepers, 8 yachts and 8 motorboats added to Admiral Lowry's 61 trawlers and minesweepers, 7 yachts and 13 motorboats. And we could concentrate at least 30 minesweeping trawlers from Charlton's general force, to make a total, if necessary, of over 200 organized small craft to watch, picket, and sweep the approaches. Besides this, there are Lowry's 8 submarines. I could put 20 seaplanes at your disposal. In fact, it seems to me certain that you could be made as safe and comfortable at the Forth as the Germans are in the Elbe, while the sweeping outwards for mines and picketing against submarines and mine layers would be far more thoroughly carried out in this limited area than at present. It would also be easy to devise a system of defensive minefields which would keep the enemy at a distance, but through which we could easily pass. The strategic advantages are too obvious to require enlarging upon. You would have your 4 battle squadrons united. It has now been decided to strengthen greatly the minefield north of the Straits of Dover so as to close that channel effectively to heavy ships. When this is done, the 5th Battle Squadron, 2 Lord Nelsons and 6 Formidables, will be moved to the Humber and join the 1st Cruiser Squadron and patrol flotillas there. The Harwich striking force, although seriously weakened by the withdrawal of the 1st Flotilla, will comprise 5 Arethusas and all the L and the M-class destroyers, together with the overseas submarines. With both these forces, you would be in close relation and would be able to give a greater personal direction to the operations than is possible while you remain at such a distance from the scene of action. All this is of course in the future, but if the change could be made in the next month or 6 weeks, it seems to me that on every ground great advantages would be secured. Your fleet would be not less safe and more efficient, and the strategic situation, whether for the attack of the enemy or for the defense of this country, would be vastly improved. I send you a copy of a project, which we are considering here for the reorganization of the battle and light cruisers, which will greatly strengthen the force at your disposal. Footnote. The project is the battle cruiser fleet. End of footnote. It embodies the principle of scouting groups, any 2 of which are capable of meeting the whole fast forces of the enemy. I have never said or thought that you are too lavish with your refits, though I think that sometimes during critical periods it is well to suspend them. Also, I hope that for the present the ships will stay as much as possible in harbour so as to reduce wear and tear to a minimum. The action on Sunday bears out all I have thought of the relative British and German strength. It is clear that at 5-4 they have no thought but flight, and that a battle fought out on this margin could have only one ending. The immense power of the 13.5-inch gun is clearly decisive on the minds of the enemy, as well as on the progress of the action. I should not feel the slightest anxiety at the idea of your engaging with equality. Still, I think it would be bad management on our part if your superiority was not much nearer 6-4 than 5-4, even under the worst conditions. One cannot now dispute the advantages of moving the Grand Fleet to the Forth. It would have taken 4 or 5 months to prepare the new base and its defences in a satisfactory way. My representations were, however, unsuccessful, and after correspondence which extended over 6 weeks, I found myself compelled to minute on March 3. The Commander-in-Chief's view must prevail, and in consequence I consider that the land defences of Scapa should immediately be begun on an emergency, but semi-permanent scale. Footnote. Up to this date all the defences were floating. End of footnote. A regular system of guns and lights on shore should be devised. Storehouses, jetties, and other conveniences should be taken in hand, and provision made for the comfort and recreation of the fleet. I should be glad if the Third Sea Lord would call a small committee to report on the subject and propose all the necessary measures. Buildings should be rented and converted as far as possible, and any new structures erected should be of the kind that can be put up most quickly. But it is clear the fleet will have to stay there for a long time to come, and should make themselves comfortable and safe. Winston as Churchill. It was not until 1917, after Admiral Beatty had become Commander-in-Chief, that the Grand Fleet was based on the Firth of Forth. The victory of the Dogger Bank brought, for the time being, abruptly to an end the adverse movement against my administration of the Admiralty, which had begun together. Congratulations flowed in from every side, and we enjoyed once again an adequate measure of prestige. The sinking of the Blücher and the flight, after heavy injuries, of the other German ships was accepted as a solid and indisputable result. The German Emperor was confirmed in the gloomy impressions he had sustained after the action of August 28, 1914. All enterprise in the German Admiralty was again effectually quelled, and apart from submarine warfare, a period of nearly 15 months Celsian calm reigned over the North Sea and throughout home waters. The neutral world accepted the event as a decisive proof of British supremacy at sea, and even at home the Admiralty felt the benefit in a sensible increase of confidence and goodwill.